Learn English through story. A lover's flame. The city of Illyria glistened beneath the golden hues of twilight. The streets were bustling with activity as the last light of day began to wane. In one quiet corner of this vast metropolis stood an old bookstore, untouched by the passing years. Its wooden sign hung from rusted chains, swaying gently in the cool autumn breeze. The Wanderer's Quill it was called, a haven for those who sought not only words but refuge from the world's noise. Inside, amidst the smell of worn pages and ink, sat Amana Damien Thorne, a lover of all things ancient, mysterious, and romantic. Damien, in his early 40s, had lived a life much like the books he sold, wrapped in stories but lacking any real substance of his own. He had once been a dreamer, but those dreams had long since been smothered by the drudgery of everyday existence. His only solace was in the poetic words of others, stories that spoke of love, loss, and passion that he could never quite seem to touch. Every day he sat behind the counter, turning the pages of forgotten novels, waiting for something to stir within him. One evening, as the shop neared closing, a woman entered. Her presence was almost otherworldly, as if she had stepped out of one of the old tales on the shelves. She was tall, with deep brown eyes that held the intensity of a flame just before it ignites. Her dark hair flowed like liquid night, and her pale skin contrasted sharply with the black coat that swirled around her ankles. She moved with grace, her footsteps barely audible on the wooden floor. Damien looked up from his book as the doorbell jingled. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. There was something familiar about her, though Damien couldn't place it. She walked slowly, running her fingers over the spines of the books, her gaze fixed ahead as though searching for something she had lost long ago. "Can I help you find anything?" Damien's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. She turned toward him, her eyes lingering on his for a moment before she smiled, though the smile never reached her eyes. "I'm looking for a book," she said, her voice soft but commanding. Damien cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "What kind of book?" "A love story," she replied, "but not the kind you're thinking of." Damien raised an eyebrow. "Go on." She moved closer to the counter, her gaze never leaving his. "I need a story about a love so powerful, so consuming, that it burns everything in its path. A love that leaves no survivors." Damien felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something in her words, in the way she said them, that unnerved him. He scanned the shelves behind him, unsure of what to offer her. There were countless tales of love, but none quite like what she described. "I'm not sure we have anything like that," he admitted. "Most love stories here are about finding happiness or overcoming tragedy." Her smile widened, though it still did not touch her eyes. "Perhaps," she said, "you'll find it in time." Before Damien could respond, she turned and walked out, the doorbell jingling softly in her wake. For a long moment, Damien stood frozen, staring at the spot where she had stood. There was something unsettling about the encounter, something that clung to him like the scent of burning wood. Over the next few days, Damien found himself thinking of the woman often. Her words echoed in his mind, a love that burns everything in its path. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had left something behind, not a book, but a question he had no answer for. One night, unable to sleep, Damien wandered back to his shop. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. Inside, the familiar scent of old paper greeted him, but tonight it felt different, almost suffocating. He moved toward the back of the shop, toward a section he rarely visited, filled with books that had long since been forgotten. As he ran his fingers over the dusty spines, His hand stopped on a leather-bound volume. It was worn, the title barely legible, The Flame of the Lover. He had never seen this book before, and yet, as he pulled it from the shelf, a strange sense of copyright vu washed over him. Damien sat down at his desk and opened the book. The pages were yellowed with age. The ink faded but still readable. The story began innocuously two lovers meeting under the light of the full moon, their love intense and immediate. But as the pages turned, the story grew darker. The lovers' passion became a consuming force, an inferno that devoured all reason, all sense of self. Their love was not a source of joy, but a flame that burned hotter with each passing moment, until there was nothing left but ashes. As Damien read, he felt an unsettling familiarity with the story. The words seemed to reach into him, pulling at something deep and primal. By the time he reached the final page, his hands were trembling. The lovers, in the end, were destroyed by their own passion, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. Damien closed the book, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never read anything like it. The story was raw, brutal, and haunting. It spoke of love so powerful that it became its own undoing, a love that consumed everything in its path, just as the woman had described. Over the next few days, Damien found himself drawn to the book, reading it over and over. Each time, he discovered something new, something that resonated with a part of himself he had long since buried. It was as though the book was speaking to him, revealing truths about love that he had never dared to consider. Then, one evening, she returned. The woman from before entered the shop, her presence just as commanding as it had been the first time. Damien looked up from the book, his heart skipping a beat. "You found it," she said, her voice soft but certain. Damien nodded, unable to speak. She moved toward him, her eyes locked on his. "Do you understand now?" Damien swallowed hard. "It's not just a story," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a warning." The woman smiled, her eyes dark and unreadable. "Love is a fire, Damien. It can warm, or it can burn. The choice is ours, but once it ignites, there's no turning back." Damien stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent his life searching for love, for meaning, but he had never considered the cost. Love, true love, wasn't the idyllic dream he had imagined. It was raw, dangerous, and all-consuming. It demanded everything and gave nothing in return. "Who are you?" Damien asked, his voice trembling. The woman's smile faded, and for the first time, Damien saw the depth of the sadness in her eyes. "I am what remains after the fire," she said softly. "I am the ashes." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the shop, leaving Damien alone once more. But this time, the silence was unbearable. Over the following weeks, Damien couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the flames of the story were creeping closer to him. The world outside seemed dull, lifeless compared to the burning intensity of the words he had read. He became obsessed with the book, reading it over and over, until the lines between fiction and reality began to blur. One night, as he sat alone in his apartment, he realized that he was no longer living his life. He was waiting for the fire to consume him, just as it had consumed the lovers in the story. He had always longed for passion, for something that would make him feel alive, but now that he had found it, he understood the terrible price it demanded. Love was not the gentle warmth he had dreamed of. It was a flame, and once it was lit, it would burn everything in its path, leaving nothing behind but ashes. Damien closed the book for the last time, his hands trembling. He understood now. The woman had shown him the truth, and the truth was this: Love was a fire that could not be controlled. It could warm, or it could destroy, but either way, it would leave its mark. As the moon rose high in the sky, Damien stood by his window, staring out into the darkness. He had spent his life searching for love, for meaning, but now he realized that the search had been in vain. Love was not something to be found or grasped. It was something that found you, something that consumed you, whether you were ready for it or not. And in the end, all that was left was the flame. The next morning, the shopkeeper of the neighboring store found the wanderer's quill closed, the lights off, and the door locked. Damien was never seen again, and the shop soon became an abandoned relic, much like the stories it once housed. Inside, the book that had consumed him lay open on the counter, its pages fluttering in the breeze. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.